Okay, so welcome to week 3, lesson 1. We are going to solve quadratics using the square root method when they are in vertex form. So if you recall from last week, vertex form is f of x equals a times x minus h squared plus k. So what do I mean by solving? We are going to start solving for the x-intercepts. Okay, which we've already done before, but we've done it only with linear equations. Now we're going to do it with quadratic equations. They could also be called zeros, okay, or roots, or solutions. So these are the 4 different names you could have for the x-intercepts when solving a quadratic equation. So I'm going to go through the first example, and I'm going to write the steps on the side. And then you can follow these steps every time you solve a quadratic equation in vertex form. So the first thing we need to do is we need to substitute y with 0. And the reason we need to do that is because if you remember, whenever we're solving for an x-intercept, we plug in 0 for the opposite, the y. So I'm going to replace y with 0 and rewrite the whole equation. Now we're just going to solve. We're going to use PEMDAS backwards. So step 2 is going to be add the constant to the other side of the equation. And the reason why I put add or subtract is because if this was a positive 48, we would subtract it to the other side. So it just depends what you have. So I'm going to move the 48 by doing the opposite. I'm going to add 48 to both sides. Cancels out over here. 0 plus 48 is 48, and I'm going to rewrite what is left over. If I'm doing PEMDAS backwards, so let's write PEMDAS out on the side. I took care of addition and subtraction. Now I'm going to take care of any multiplication or division. So I see I have this 3 outside the parentheses. So step 3 is going to be divide by the constant in front of the parentheses. And the reason why I put if necessary is because sometimes there won't be a constant in front. So then we don't have to do step 3. But right now we got to get rid of that 3. So I'm going to divide by 3 on both sides. 48 divided by 3 is 16. And I'm going to write what's left over. So working my way up, I took care of addition and subtraction, I took care of multiplication and division. Now I got to take care of any exponents that there may be. So I have an exponent of 2. Now, the opposite of squaring something is square rooting. So maybe we'll put that at the top of the page. If I have an x squared, the opposite is to square root that number. So I'm going to square root both sides. It cancels out that exponent. And when I take the square root of 16, okay, you could put that in your calculator, you're going to get actually 2 answers, even though the calculator only gives you 1. So the square root of 16 is a positive and a negative 4. Why is that? Because when I have 4 times 4, a positive times a positive is a 16, positive 16. But if I do negative 4 times negative 4, a negative times a negative is also a positive 16. So that's why I'm going to have 2 answers. So plus minus always in front. And I'm going to write what's left over. So step 4, square root both sides. And put plus minus in front of answer. Okay, we want to make sure you don't forget both answers. Step 5. Now, since I have 2 answers and there's still one more step left over, right? I gotta move this 2 to get x by itself. I have to actually split this up. So step 5 is split up into two equations and solve. So if I split up into two equations, I have positive 4 equals x minus 2, and I have negative 4 equals x minus 2. To solve this one, I have to add 2 to both sides to get x by itself. So x is 6. There's my first 0 or root. I have to add 2 on this side to get x by itself. So negative 2 is my second root or 0. So if I was to graph this parabola, it would cross the x-axis at 6, and it would cross the x-axis at negative 2. So these are the 5 steps you're going to follow each time. So we're going to do another example together, and I'm going to follow each and every step again. Okay, so here we go again, example 2. Step 1, substitute 0 for y. So I'm going to replace y with a 0 and rewrite the equation. Step 2, add or subtract the constant to the other side of the equation. The constant is a number hanging out by itself on the end. So since it's a positive 8, I'm going to do the opposite. I'm going to subtract 8. 0 minus 8 is negative 8, and rewrite the rest of the equation. Step 3, divide by the constant in front of the parentheses. So we do have a constant in front. It's a negative 2. So we're going to divide by negative 2 on both sides. So negative 8 divided by negative 2 is a positive 4. Write what's left over. Step 4, square root both sides and put plus minus in front of your answer. So square rooting both sides. That 2 goes away. Square root of 4 is 2, and I have to put plus or minus in front of my answer. And I'm going to write what's left over. Step 5, split up into two equations and solve. So splitting it up, I have a positive 2 equals x plus 5, and a negative 2 equals x plus 5. I'm going to subtract 5 to get x by itself, and I get negative 3 as my first 0, or my x-intercept. I'm going to subtract 5 on this one. I get negative 7 as my second answer, or root or 0. So if I was to graph this parabola, it would cross the x-axis at negative 3 and negative 7. So I'm going to ask that you try example 3 on your own and submit your answers once you've completed the question. So hopefully you got it right, but if not, let's walk through the problem. So step 1, substitute 0 for y. Rewrite the rest of the problem. Step 2, add or subtract the constant. So the constant would be 100, so I'm going to add 100 to the other side. 0 plus 100 is 100. Rewrite what's left over. Step 3, divide by a constant in front of the parentheses. Well, I'm in luck. There is no constant in front of the parentheses, so I can skip step 3. Step 4, square root both sides. Okay, that cancels out the exponent. Square root of 100 is 10. I'm going to put plus minus in the front and write what's left over. And then step 5, split it up and solve each equation. So we've got a positive 10 equals x minus 1, and we've got a negative 10 equals x minus 1. To get x by itself, I have to add 1 to both sides. So I get 11 for my first root. Here I have to add 1 to get x by itself. So I'm going to get negative 9 as my second root. So that's how you solve a quadratic in vertex form.